Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Suchon.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are heading out to New York City. We're going to talk writing. We're going to talk freelance writing, data journalism, what it's like to be a freelancer who covers lifestyle and pop culture and travel and entertainment and so much more. Our guest is Jamie Ballard. She attended San Diego State from 2013 through 2017. Yes, she is a freelance writer. She has written for Cosmo, Women's Day, YouGov, Good Housekeeping, People, Hollywood Reporter, and so many more. Jamie, welcome to the Where You At podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and chat freelancing.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm excited to talk freelancing too, because I did it for about 15 months and there was months that it was super wonderful. I made money and I hardly worked. And then there was other months in which I did not work one day and it was extremely stressful. And so I'm really curious to kind of dive into the world of being a freelance writer and what all it entails. Before we start with that though, so I'm looking at your LinkedIn and I can tell that you have been a writer for a long time, going back to your high school days. So let's start with, when did you think that you wanted to be a writer and why did you think that you wanted to be a writer at an early age?
Yeah, I got involved with journalism probably in middle school. The town I grew up in, Sonoma, had a student reporter program associated with the local newspaper, the Sonoma Index-Tribune. So I applied for that, got in, and I just found I really loved the process of building a story piece by piece, talking to people about, their passions and their interests. I think the first story I wrote that was ever published was about a local puppeteering company. And I just thought it was amazing that these women were so passionate about puppets that I was like, yeah, I want to talk to people about their sort of odd little interests forever. So I did that. And then the woman who runs that program, Emily Charrier-Botts, she was kind of my first mentor. She brought me on as a summer intern for the Index Tribune, and I just kind of did that every summer until I left for college. So that was pretty early start. To answer your question about how I knew, like I said, I just sort of had a natural interest and knack for it, and it felt right.
Not everyone who has this idea in junior high or high school about what they want to do sticks with it. You obviously did stick with it. Was there a certain point, whether it was at San Diego State or after San Diego State, when you realized yes, I am a writer and this is what I'm going to be doing for a very long time in my life?
I can't say I can point to a specific moment necessarily. I think maybe the sustained love of it, the fact that through high school, through college, I kept wanting to do it. Nothing else really held my interest. Maybe I flirted with other ideas of I think I wanted to be a nurse for a period, but nothing just felt as right as journalism. It's sort of I think a lot of people, myself included, have trouble trusting your gut, but this was just one that it was in my body, in my heart, in my mind. I know this is right.
Well, you come to San Diego State and you jammed a lot into your 4 years. But first, tell us why San Diego State. I mean, I love the campus. What's not to love about San Diego and the campus and the school? But for you, why did San Diego State end up being your choice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always tell people because now I live in New York, so I actually don't have that many people who are familiar with San Diego. I always tell people it's sort of like going to college. What you see of college in the movies is pretty much what San Diego State was like. It's gorgeous all the time. You have people throwing frisbees on the lawn. People are skateboarding around campus. It's amazing. So I appreciated sort of it felt like college to me. It felt right. And I knew they had a great journalism program, which was, if you haven't guessed already, I kind of knew I was going to major in journalism from, early high school. So I knew they had a great journalism program and I knew they had a great student newspaper, which was really important to me. And then as a more maybe practical note, I grew up in Northern California. So CSUs were obviously more financially within reach. And I had this idea that being a journalist was not a very lucrative career. So I sort of knew I didn't want to take out very expensive student loans if I could avoid it. So that's maybe not the most romantic answer, but it definitely was part of my decision making.
It never ceases to amaze me how many people I meet from Northern California who decided they wanted to go away from home. They wanted to go to Southern California, but they did not want to go to LA. They wanted to go to San Diego instead. And because I'm among those as well, for me, it was, I wanted to be as far away from home and still have in-state tuition, and can definitely relate to everything about San Diego. In fact, I did it was like a week-long thing at the Poynter Institute for Media Studies in St. Petersburg. And I remember I was the only one from the West Coast that was out there. And I remember there was this one girl, and she said, "Oh, it's so perfect that you have blonde hair. Like, of course the guy from San Diego needed to have blonde hair." And I remember telling her, yeah, I might have had a few too many alcoholic beverages and dyed my hair about a week before I got here, but she doesn't need to know that. And the other thing I remember telling her was, I said that San Diego State is actually on an island, and we have to take a ferry to get there, but there's a lot of students who just surf there, and they put their surfboards up the way that people would have a bicycle rack, and she believed it. I remember thinking, if only people knew, how ridiculous this conversation is. But that's a totally different topic. Let's talk about the Daily Aztec, because that is definitely also something that you and I have in common. It was a huge part of my life. Tell us how you got started at the Daily Aztec.
Yeah, I believe I started there as an entertainment reporter as a freshman. So I think I was doing a lot of going to like local or on-campus plays and things like that. Eventually, I think sophomore year, maybe I moved towards the news division, and that I found, again, it was just like, oh, this feels right. Like, I really like this. I'm enjoying doing this, going to Associated Students meetings, like talking to people on campus about their thoughts on big changes happening with budgets and, on-campus politics and all of that. And then I think my junior year, I studied abroad for half the year, but I did write one article about my study abroad experience. So I still sort of wanted to have that connection and to stay involved. And then the latter half of my junior year, I was the news editor. And then senior year, I was managing editor. So I kind of just kept like working my way up, as people do, because, there's that constant turnover of people graduating or leaving or, all of that. So, yeah.
Basically, if you start as a freshman at the Daily Aztec, by the time you get to be your senior year, there's nobody left from freshman year. And so you're going to end up as the managing editor or the editor.
That's pretty much true. Yeah, that is kind of how it went. Now that I think about it, everyone else at the paper by the time I was a senior was people that aside from one person, Christine Whitman. But other than that, it was all different faces.
One of the things that I remember about being a student journalist is just the idea that at first, maybe you don't want to ruffle any feathers. You just want to write something where no one's going to get mad at you. And you just want to just write these stories that just kind of make people smile. And then at a certain point, especially when you're writing news and Associated Student stories, then you realize I need to be able to write something that people may not like. And this is what being a reporter is really like. And I'm wondering what that was like for you, tackling hard news that people may not like when they see it in print.
Yeah, that was something that I still struggle with. I'm definitely a people pleaser, so ruffling feathers is, out of my comfort zone. I think I did feel sort of this obligation because, and this is not an original thought, I think I heard maybe Alex or Jack say this on an earlier podcast, but it's basically like a small city that you're covering. Like there are, 30,000 students or something who attend SDSU or the Imperial campus. There's stuff happening that they need to know. And so if administration doesn't like that you're reporting on it, that's probably a good sign, right? It means like you're reporting something that people should know about and should care about. And yeah, it's definitely tough. If I were to like give advice to someone currently in that seat, I think I would say that if you have the conviction that what you're reporting is important, like trust that, go with that. And also like, reporting matters a lot, but people also will like get over things. Like it's, you're not going to make an enemy for life necessarily. People will probably move on to something else to be mad about soon. And that maybe feels a little contradictory to like, it's important, but also people will forget it. But I think holding both of those ideas brought me some level of comfort.
Yeah, I remember some of the older student journalists when I first started who would say things like, if you don't get yelled at a couple of times a semester, you're probably not doing your job right.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Go
ahead.
I think there is a way to be a good reporter, but also do it with compassion. Like, I think you don't necessarily have to be like super like tough and like, so insistent upon yourself. I think you can do it in a sort of like kind way that even if people don't like it, at least it's like, well, you know what, like this was right and this was done, good intentions. And I think that matters a little bit too.
You mentioned Alex and Jack, and they've been on the podcast before. And I know that I talked with them about this, just in terms of when there's a campus of 30,000 people, it can be intimidating when there's that many. And so what did the Daily Aztec or other organizations that you were with on campus just help you find a sense of camaraderie and community and friendship and other like-minded student journalists who you could bond more with?
Yeah, it meant a lot to me. I still have very good friends that I made through the Daily Aztec. It also, just having a physical office meant something where it's like between classes, I could come just go and hang out and just chat to whoever was around. And I think that really created a lot of those bonds because yes, like we're putting out this paper, there's a lot of work to do, but oftentimes people would just hang out there and like treat it as sort of a lounge. And that's how you get to chat with people and learn about their lives and like kind of form those friendships. So, that was amazing. I also was on the SDSU water ski wakeboard team, and that's how I made a lot of friends, aside from the Daily Aztec. So I was kind of going between these two friend groups. And that was also just a lot of fun. And, I still also have great friends from that. So college is kind of the only time you get to try out stuff like, oh, I think I'm going to go try, competitive water skiing. Like, I don't think I can do that in my adult life necessarily. So
I was just wondering, how does someone from wine country end up doing competitive water skiing and waterboarding?
I had done a little bit of wakeboarding growing up. Wine country actually does have a Lake Berryessa. And so I went there as a kid. And then when I came to college, what they do is they'll like bring the boat onto campus and then like pass out flyers by the boat. So you're like, what's this boat doing here? And then, they start talking to you and they tell you how much fun it is and that you get to like hang out on the water all the time. And you're like, okay, yeah, this is what I moved to San Diego for.
Okay, before we move on from San Diego to kind of venturing off into the quote real world, any other classes, whether they were journalism or non-journalism, just any other things about your time at San Diego State that just really resonates with you, that just really helped mold you into the person who you are now?
That is such a thoughtful question. I think the first class that came to mind was opinion writing with David Cotton, who I think also contributes to the Union Tribune and used to contribute to City Beat. And that was kind of, as you're saying, news reporting was maybe more of a focus, and it's a totally different thing. And they sort of try to keep news and opinion separate at the Daily Aztec when I was there. So I really had like no experience with opinion writing. It's just a totally different take on things. And it was so much more personal that it sort of, it was a new experience. And I found that I really liked it. Even today, I don't really do a lot of like personal writing because it's so different from what I usually do. But I'm so glad that I had that experience and that I got to try that out.
Okay, so you worked at the Daily Aztec. You had all of these other internships. It would take a long time to list all of the other internships that you did when you're at campus. So once you are graduating and you're moving on into the real world, what were kind of like the key moments that helped you go from student to, okay, I've got this and I've got this, and kind of got you going that students nowadays can learn from?
Probably one of the like biggest factors in my career was a mentorship by Mike Sager, who's a journalist who lives in San Diego. He writes for Esquire, Rolling Stone. He's basically written for like every magazine ever. He has his own publishing company. He's just like a master of long form journalism. So during college, I think he reached out maybe to Nicole Vargas, the JMS internship or career coordinator at the time, and said he was looking for like an assistant, basically someone to like transcribe his interviews. And so I did that during college, and we really developed, a close working relationship during that. I was transcribing his interviews, and it taught me pretty much everything I know about interviewing. Like, he is so good at letting people go, and then, interrupting at the right time and sort of directing the conversation, but also sort of letting it guide itself. He's amazing. So long story short, as I said, he was an editor at large at Esquire. And so during college, I got an internship at Esquire, got to work with the journalists there. And I think that has sort of influenced my post-career or my post-college trajectory, just because the Hearst magazines all talk to one another and they like it if you know their system. So Mike and then Esquire definitely helped me jump off in New York.
Okay, so let's get into New York. Tell us the process of applying for this job, hearing about this job, moving to New York, and the excitement versus the. Are you scared? Are you excited? Just tell us about moving to New York.
Yeah, I kind of always knew I wanted to live in New York since I took a field trip in 8th grade. And I just had that we were like in the downtown sort of financial district, and there were all these people like looking very serious in suits and like getting their coffee. And I was like, wow, kind of like San Diego State. I was like, this is just like the movies. Like, I like this. I want to live here. So I kind of already always had it in the back of my head that I wanted to move here someday. So immediately after graduation, I actually stayed in San Diego for a little bit. I worked at San Diego City Beat, which has since folded tragically, but it was a great, starting place. I got to report a lot about San Diego, but I still had it in my head, like, okay, New York's where I want to be. I'm going to keep applying for things in New York. Eventually I got this fellowship with Good Housekeeping, and by fellowship, they kind of just mean it's the same thing as an internship, except you've graduated. That's the only difference for these fellowships anyway. So I moved to New York. I was scared. This job did not pay very much, but I found like the smallest, like tiniest room you've ever seen in this little East Village apartment with 2 roommates who I met on Facebook who were like total strangers. The room I was in, it was like practically a closet. I'm not exaggerating. It fit a bed and that was about it. But I loved it so much. And I was like, I made it. I'm in New York. Did that. I walked dogs and pet sat on the side to like make ends meet, which was also fun and kind of helped me get to know the city a little bit better. So I actually really enjoyed that. And then that was kind of the whole moving to New York. That fellowship lasted 6 months. And then it was sort of a question of like, okay, how am I going to stay here?
Oh, to be young again is what I was thinking, because I thought about the strangers I met on Craigslist and living in a 5-bedroom house in San Francisco where my room was pretty tiny, like super, super tiny again. And yes, and it's like, okay, I'm young and I don't care. I'm just going to try to figure out a way. And then you get to a certain point and you go, okay, I don't want 5 roommates and I don't want to have to do all of these other things just to make ends meet. And so tell us about the next steps, about like the key moments, the key decisions, the key people that you meet in order to get to a point where, okay, I can have a little bit more room in my apartment, so I don't have quite as many roommates.
Yes. So after the Good Housekeeping Fellowship wrapped up, it was a really positive experience, but they just weren't hiring entry level at that point. So it was, my time there was coming to an end. So I was applying to stuff all over the place. I ended up applying for this data journalist role at YouGov, which I think I had taken one class at SDSU that touched on data journalism, but I really didn't have like a super strong grasp of it. But I think what they liked about me was that I had worked at kind of this wide variety of places. Like I had worked at, Good Housekeeping. It's a magazine. It's, we might call it a women's magazine. I'd worked doing news coverage on like homelessness for San Diego City Beat. I had done all the stuff at the Daily Aztec that we discussed. So I think they liked that I was ready to tackle like a really wide range of subjects. So I think that's how I got the job, because I didn't have a ton of experience like writing surveys, which is what YouGov does for people who aren't familiar with it. They do public opinion surveys and then they have journalists write about the results. So I did that for a few years and I absolutely loved that. I met some great friends through that job. And it was really interesting. It's nice to be able to quantify, like, here's what people think, rather than just being like, this is what I see on Twitter. So.
No, that's really good. And I want to go a little bit deeper into that, because I think that data journalism becomes more and more important nowadays. Now that we have the tools and we have the ability to do that, it's really easy for us to just be in our bubble and go, everybody thinks this because your circle of friends does. So give us more details about how YouGov goes about surveys, and then how the data journalists take that and turn it into a story that's compelling.
Yeah. So there are kind of a few different ways into it. Maybe you have an idea because all of your friends are talking about it, or you are seeing it a lot on Twitter and you're like, I wonder, like, I want to ask about this. So then you would maybe draft some survey questions. They go through an approval process with a bunch of different editors and data experts, basically. Eventually you have a survey that goes out to a panel of people who have signed up with YouGov to take surveys. Most surveys get, 1,000 responses, and those are weighted to make sure they're as representative as possible of the population. So let's say your sample was like a lot more women than men, you'd sort of like weight that differently so it reflected the actual population of women and men based on what we know about the census. And then you get those results back, usually just in a spreadsheet, but they also have an interface for people who work there that you can kind of tool around in. And then you look through and you kind of just try to find out what's interesting. And you can look at all of your data by a billion different factors. So you can look at like, what do people of different religions say about this question? What do people of different races say? Gender, generation. You can break it down to like, all 28-year-olds or something, crazy small like that. Sometimes your samples get a little too small and you can't do that, but it's basically like a playground of data where it's like practically anything you wanted to have data on, you could get, or a lot of times it was just already there in the system. You could just poke around until you found it and then, write a story about that. So like I said, you're looking for the most interesting things, and then you'll write copy about it. And then we make charts also for like visualization. And those are also really helpful on social media for people who want to see stuff like at a glance.
We might kind of bounce around at this point in the podcast, but I know that since we're talking about this, you wrote a story about subtitles on TV that I found fascinating, because I'm someone who only wants subtitles on the TV screen if I'm at a bar and I can't hear what's going on. But you wrote a story about the number of people who like subtitles, even if it's a language that they know in their home. And so give us more details about just this interesting concept of who likes subtitles and who doesn't when they're watching television.
Yeah, this one was I loved this one because I'm pro subtitle. I have subtitles on by my own choice all the time, and it's hard to say why. But my partner, who I live with, doesn't like subtitles, finds them distracting. So it's kind of an ongoing battle in our household, so to speak. So this one came about because YouGov is international. They have, they started in England, in Great Britain. So they ran the survey first, actually, and they had such a response to it that we decided to run it on the US side as well. But also I've been seeing articles from like The Atlantic and The New Yorker about why everyone has subtitles on all of a sudden. So it was definitely a conversation over here as well. So we reran it. We made some tweaks. Since we didn't like directly compare the polls, they didn't have to be exactly the same. So we changed it a little bit. That is how we got the survey. But yeah, I have it up in front of me. Yeah, 38% of people prefer subtitles on when watching TV in a language they know. And what was especially crazy about this is that young people are so much more likely. It's 63% of people under 30 prefer having subtitles on, which is just so interesting to me.
So once you get the data, it's not like you can interview all 1,000 people, but then once you do get the data, how do you then glean the reasons why and trying to give specific, examples of it? Because like you said, you do, your partner doesn't. I'm not someone who wants subtitles, again, unless I'm at like the gym or something. How much do you then get into the science of why this is, especially if it's different generations?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. So we did ask the question sort of both people who like it and people who don't. We gave a number of response options for why you might like it. And it's like, do you feel like the sound mixing is like, it's hard to hear the dialogue over the music, versus like, do you not like it? Do you find it distracting? And so we kind of came up with reasons people might like or dislike them on either side. And then, but we always have a bucket for like other, like you have another reason, and then you can write that in if you're taking this survey. And we can't necessarily use those. They aren't like statistically significant, because that is just like, this one guy said this one thing. But I find it interesting to look through those. And occasionally what we will do is sample those within a story and say like, maybe for more political ones, we'll do this sort of about abortion or why you like or dislike Donald Trump, and let people say in their own words. And then we'll publish kind of a little graphic with like, a handful of those quotes, just to get some humanity in all of this data.
Okay, so you're working for YouGov, and now you start branching off and doing more and more freelance work. Tell us about the process of people finding you or you finding them and you pitching yourself in order to try and get more and more bylines at more and more different magazines.
Yeah, of course. So I think in 2018, someone I'd worked with at Good Housekeeping just reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in doing some freelance work. And I said yes, because I felt like I wanted to keep using, that muscle and keep doing that kind of writing in addition to doing the more like, data focused work. So for many months, I was just doing like 2 or 3 assignments a month, mostly for Hearst magazines. So like Women's Day, Good Housekeeping, all of those editors. Sometimes it's the same editor overseeing multiple publications. So that's kind of how that worked at that time. And that was kind of just like, it's a nice little bit of extra money on the side. I like doing it, but it was definitely still a more casual thing. And then a couple of years later, I sort of felt like I was ready to try something new. Like I loved YouGov, but I was like, okay, I'm kind of ready to start experimenting with other stuff, like try something different. And I sort of got like bitten by the bug. It's like, I could freelance full time. Like I have the contacts. I'm, good at it. I think I could maybe make this work full time. And so I started saving up money to have like a little cushion, because I was like, I can't just go full freelance without some financial like safety net. So I started putting money aside to pursue that. And right as I was like getting ready and I was like, okay, I think we're getting close to it being time, I got an offer from Cosmopolitan to like a freelance contract with them, basically. So I was working a certain number of hours a week with them. It was more like part-time, but they called it freelance as a like technicality. And that was supposed to be for a few months. And I thought that, okay, this is a good on-ramp. I'll do this for a few months and then like I'll be, fully, totally freelance, like, not encumbered by anyone else's schedule. And yeah, the Cosmo thing ended up lasting a lot longer than anyone thought it would. So I did that for a while and, just like collecting more freelance clients on the side. Now the Cosmo thing did come to an end. So now I am just fully freelance, just like client by client.
So I want to get into what people should know about the world of freelancing and what's important. I've always felt that and tell me if I'm wrong, but I always felt like you need that one that even if you're not full-time with them, you know that you're going to get X amount of stories or X number of dollars from this one. And then you got a pretty good idea about like the second one or this third one. But give us in your words when you knew, okay, I have enough clients, I have just enough confidence that this is going to work, where you felt like, okay, I can take this plunge.
Yeah. No, I'm exactly the same as what you just described. I have like an anchor client. Mine is probably Women's Day because I do, 7 or 8 assignments for them a month. And that ends up being a sizable portion of my income. I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but yeah, so I had contacts there. I'd already talked to my editor at YouGov and said I would be willing to freelance for them after I left. So I kind of knew they would give me as many assignments as I wanted at like a rate that I had set and was comfortable with. So between those two, I was like, okay, that's enough that I could like scrape by. I can pay my bills with that. But then obviously we want to be traveling and saving for retirement and all that fun stuff. So it was a lot of reaching out to people that I had come across at some point in the past, like maybe an editor who used to work at a place I worked, who now worked at this other place. I would maybe reach out to him or her and say like, hey, like, I'm available for freelance assignments if you're ever looking, like loved working with you before, let me know. And that was pretty lucrative. That I got a few responses from that. Another piece of the puzzle for me was reaching out to editors at publications that were doing similar things to publications I already worked at. So I had worked a lot for Cosmopolitan doing shopping stories. So I reached out to Allure, a similar magazine, to their shopping editor saying like, if you ever need to assign stuff, I know SEO, I know how these commerce stories work. I'd be willing to take some of those on. So I did that for Allure and the Hollywood Reporter. And both of those, they happened to need freelancers when I reached out. So that's kind of how that came about. And then the last piece, and this is something I want to spend more time doing, but I would advise anyone starting freelance to really prioritize it, looking for places to pitch ideas that you're passionate about. So if you've got a good story idea, like taking the time, reading a bunch of different places, subscribing to different newsletters that put out these calls for pitches and, send those to editors. Because I think people can tell when it's an idea that you are really passionate about.
Okay, so you said so many good things in there, and I'm trying to take notes so that
yeah, sorry, I feel like I'm monologuing.
That's okay. It was a really good monologue. Let's start with when you said reaching out to. Is that cold calling? Is it cold emailing? Is it, hey, do you know someone who's over there? Is it a combination of things when you're reaching out to these different editors?
Yeah, great question. It's for me mostly cold emailing. Sometimes I will like look on LinkedIn and see like if we have any connections in common. And then maybe I will talk to our mutual connection and sort of like feel it out. Be like, do you know if she ever works with freelancers? Is it okay if I use your name in my email? Because I think that sometimes editors get, hundreds of emails a day. So I always want to make mine stand out. So I'll even title the subject line like freelance writer availability and then parentheses from like Amy Smith conversation or something where it's like, okay, you'll see the name Amy Smith and you'll click on me.
Right.
That's kind of my like cold reach out strategy. If I don't have any contact, I'll just do like freelance writer availability, and I'll just send them an email saying, you know, if you ever work with freelancers, I'd love to be in your roster. Here's my experience. Here are a few of my clips and I choose clips that are relevant to what they do. So most of what I do is related to like search engine optimization articles or shopping articles. So I'll try and find a few of those that are similar enough to things they've already written that they'll see like, okay, she knows what she's talking about and she might be a good fit here.
You have a website, which is a really good one, which made it super easy for me to find articles that you've written and to find more background for this podcast. It also makes it super easy for people to find you. What would be your advice for who needs a website, a personal website, and what should be on their personal website?
That is also a really good question. I need to update mine, so I'm glad you found it helpful. I would say mine's just Squarespace. It's a pretty affordable platform as far as websites go. I think freelance writers, editors, editorial consultants, kind of anything in the writing space, I think it's great to have a website so that people can find what you've written. I think what's important to have on there is, you know, a little about me paragraph, just sort of letting people know what kinds of things you do. So mine's a little bit all over the place, but it does say I do a lot of SEO work, a lot of commerce, data journalism. And then it also includes some stuff that I maybe don't write that much about, but want to write more about. So like travel is on there. I find internet culture really interesting. So I think that might be on there. So sort of like what you already do and what you want, like a few things that you want to do more of, I think is a great thing to have on your website. And then contact information. I have my email on my website, which is, I think it's a good idea, but it does mean that publicists can find me very easily and send me like 9,000 pitches about their client that has nothing to do with what I do. But I respect the hustle, I gotta say. Like, even if it's not relevant, I respect that you've gone to the trouble of going to my website and finding my email. So
you mentioned SEO a couple of times, search engine optimization. I find that this is super important because we want to write, we want people to read it, and people need to find it. And so much of that is, I'm looking for something, but as a journalist, you're looking for the same thing. And so you basically want to make sure that when I go to look for something, you've already looked for it for me. And what you wrote is going to show up at the top. What were some of the different ways that you have learned the best SEO practices that other writers can learn from so that they can get their stories on that first page of Google? Because if it's on page 2 of Google, no one's seeing it.
Yeah, totally. Well, that was a great description of SEO. You described it pretty much how I do in terms of like trying to get it near the top on the first page. I would say most places at this point have in-house SEO specialists or like engineers. I'm not exactly sure of the title, but those people kind of figure out like what levers need to be pulled, and they keep up with Google's like constant updates and how Google's going to reward or punish like different pieces of content. So by the time it gets to me, a lot of times engineer and an editor have already figured out like these are the keywords that we need, and these are the pieces within our content management system that need to be prioritized. So like, for example, a lot of Hearst pieces now have these little, we call them custom tags, but if you have a product, you can write in and it'll be like, you know, best slippers for like people who need arch support or something sort of specific like that, but you know it's what people are searching for. So just finding ways to kind of stuff keywords in like wherever you can. You have to like make sure your images are saved with the correct title, because Google can see it all. So it's looking at your images and it's trying to decide like whether this article is legitimate and actually useful. So the more you can convince it in these, like, obviously write good content first and foremost, but then the more you can convince it on all these little like back end ways that your content is legit, it'll, you know, boost you closer and closer to the top. But it is super interesting. That's, you know, I rarely decide. I usually just get told like how many items need to be in each article. So it'll be like, okay, other places are doing like 22 to 25. So let's do 25. And that also, it's fascinating how many little elements of it there are. So if I were starting today, I would take like an SEO course just to really get to know all of that.
How do you balance this juggling act between this is what we have to do for SEO, but also I don't want my copy to be boring and straightforward.
Yeah.
I want to have flair and drama, and I want to have a long paragraph and the short paragraph. And I kind of want to, just like make people feel like they're hearing my voice as I'm writing this, as opposed to hearing this SEO voice that's very specific.
Yeah, I think people can tell when it's an SEO voice, though. I know I can, and granted, I work in it all the time, so I'm maybe more attuned to it than a lot of people. But I think anyone can tell when this is sort of written just like around certain keywords because it's so repetitive. It's like best slippers for women, and you're like, I get it, best slippers, like whatever. I think I use online thesauruses a lot to be like, how can I describe this differently? Because when you're writing about like 40 pairs of slippers, it's like, okay, how much is there really to say about these? Like, I feel like I've said they're cushy and supportive 800 times. So it's maybe looking at thesaurus, like finding different ways to say things. I personally get a lot from product reviews online. Like, I like to see what actual people are saying about it. And sometimes I'll even quote those reviews in the write-up, which I feel like gives an element of like, this is what a real person who tried this item said about it. And I think that helps a lot. But I think also, like I was talking about pitching your passion projects a few minutes ago, I think accepting that like SEO, you are working within certain constraints and you maybe aren't as creative as you'd like to be. But if you can maybe sort of like, okay, I'm just going to do this like according to the things. I'm not going to like pour my soul into this. I'm just going to get it done, get the money for it, like, and then spend my creative energy on this thing that I actually care about. So compartmentalizing a little bit.
Yeah. So you mentioned something a few minutes ago. Let's go back to, and I felt like there was this all new world that I didn't know about. And that's this idea that editors want to be pitched. And there's these newsletters or emails or whatever, where they're asking for pitches of stories. Give us more about how you find out about this secret world of people who want to be pitched on your passion project idea.
Yeah, of course. I wish I had known about this so much sooner. So I'm happy to share. There are a few newsletters that I think are really helpful. One of them is called Study Hall XYZ, and they send out a like opportunities email, I think twice a week, and it includes a lot of like freelance or full-time jobs that are taking applications, but it also includes calls for pitches from different editors and magazines, and it'll include details about what they're looking for and not looking for a lot of the time. So that's a great place to find people and places to pitch. Another one that does something similar is called, it's just called Ops of the Week. It's put out by a woman named Sonia Weiser. She has a huge Twitter following, so I'm sure this will come up quickly. And she also puts one out twice a week. There's some overlap between those two newsletters, but sometimes one of them has something the other doesn't. So I find it useful to read both. And also, I mean, I know there's maybe mixed feelings on whether Twitter is kind of worth it anymore or like a useful platform, but a lot of editors are still on there saying like, pitch me, your LGBTQ stories for Pride Month and stuff like that. So being active on that platform, I think, can maybe also be helpful. But then lastly, I think I would say maybe you see like a call for pitches and you don't really have something at the moment that fits that. I sometimes will save like editor contact info in a spreadsheet and sort of like notes to myself about what they do or what they cover, so that maybe in like 4 months when I have a good idea, I can reach out and say, if you're still soliciting pitches, here's one.
So that leads into a really good question about being a freelancer. And I know it's impossible to put a percentage on this, but if you had to take a guess on what percentage of your day you spend looking for freelance work and what percentage you spend actually doing the freelance work, how would you say that you divide up your time, whether it's day to day or within the context of a week or a month, for the next story and the current story?
Yeah. Right now I've been really busy with stuff that's been assigned to me. I haven't done a ton of like pitching or having to solicit other work, which is great. I kind of tend to work on like 1 or 2 articles a day because, like I said, I'm doing a lot of these like SEO and shopping articles. Some of them need expert, reach out and stuff like that. So those might take a little longer, but usually I can start and finish a piece or two like within the same day, and it's sort of contained within the day. And then outside of that, I try to schedule myself, like I call it pitching hour on my Google Calendar, where it's like, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to like look at my little list of, on my phone, I just have like story ideas that I think are cool, or like a kernel that could be a cool story idea. So sometimes I'll just pick one of those and sort of like devote some more time to like, is this something, like who would I talk to for this? But I have to put that on my calendar. Otherwise it doesn't happen. And then as far as reaching out for just other like not passion project work, just miscellaneous, that I will sometimes find that I have a lull around like the first week of the month. So that's kind of when I'll maybe email editors I've worked with before, being like, hey, I have some room in my calendar if there's anything you're looking to assign. And that actually has a decent success rate too. I think sometimes people just get so busy that they sort of, I don't want to say like forget about you, but they're so busy that they forgot they have to assign this thing. And then if you reach out and you're like, oh, they're like, oh yeah, I could give this to her. Like, great. And it solves everyone's problems.
Okay, so we have to get to just the super fun story where you took a trip to Panama and what it's like going on a press trip where you go to a place like Panama and you stay at these amazing hotel and you get to do helicopter tours and find out about this different place to encourage people to go for a vacation to Panama. Tell us how the Panama story came together.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was when I was doing the sort of like part-time freelancing for Cosmo. Basically, publicists for some of these hotels or travel agencies or airlines will reach out trying to get their client placed in a magazine or publication like Cosmopolitan. And so Cosmopolitan then can send a writer or an editor on one of these trips that's been totally organized by the publicist and, you know, all of the places that they work with. And then the idea, it's usually you're with a group of journalists, other journalists. So that's kind of fun too. You get to meet other people. You're usually there with a publicist also who's kind of like guiding the whole excursion. And yeah, they just sort of like, they're trying to create a really nice experience for you in hopes that you'll write about your really nice experience and encourage people to then take these trips. But I had no idea this was a thing. I thought all of like the travel writing that you see was just self-funded or it was by staff writers. So it was really cool. I just kind of jumped at the Panama opportunity, like put my hand up for it and ended up getting chosen for that. And yeah, it's so amazing that these trips exist. There's obviously some maybe complicated questions about whether you're writing an honest review if you've, you know, kind of been paid to promote it. But I think there's definitely a way to like thread that needle and to make sure that your assessment of it is honest and, you know, honest about the good parts. And maybe like you can also be honest about stuff that maybe didn't meet your expectations. You just have to maybe do that carefully and think about preserving your relation. If you want to go on future press trips, maybe you know, try and play nice with the publicist and keep them happy. But it's just so fun. Again, it's stuff that I never would have been able to do. This hotel was so fancier than anything I'm ever going to book for myself. But it was cool to experience that and be able to bring that firsthand perspective.
Yeah, so you kind of alluded this in terms of just the journalistic integrity side of it, because I feel like what's the catch? I mean, whether it's the publicist who's putting this together or whether it's the journalists who are going on there, yeah, you don't want to, you know, burn that bridge. At the same time, you want to be honest about it. But also, if they're putting you up at this 4 or 5 star hotel, of course, everything's going to go right with it. Like that's their whole point. Is there anything else that we should know about? Like, what is the catch to what sounds like an amazing opportunity?
I've wondered this and I haven't totally come to a conclusion. My best guess is that my work is more valuable than I think it is. Like it matters so much to them to get their hotel or airline or experience placed in a magazine like Cosmopolitan that millions of people are going to read. And I think that like that matters a lot more to people on the PR side or, you know, people in the industry than I think I accounted for necessarily. So I think that's kind of the conclusion I've come to. Like, what's the catch? And it's like, the catch is just that they really, really, really want their stuff featured. And it's like, okay, I guess that's pretty straightforward.
I think the number one takeaway that I got actually from your story about Panama, because I can't afford to go to the hotels that you described. And I think the helicopter tours are really neat, but they're also really expensive. It's just that there's this airline that allows you to do a layover, and the layover can be 24 hours and it doesn't cost anything more. So that to me, that's probably my biggest takeaway is that I could go to Panama for 24 hours on my way to somewhere else, and it's not going to cost me anything else because of this airline.
Yeah. Copa Airlines was, you know, as you can guess, was one of the airlines that helped fund this trip. So we gave them a nice little write-up about that stopover. And that's the thing is that, yes, they obviously paid money to be included, but I also genuinely, as a person, I would recommend that to you, like without a doubt. I genuinely think that's cool. And I think that's maybe another way to sort of thread that needle about journalism and ethics and everything. If there's something that you don't have to write about everything. So maybe there's something that's like, well, this meal kind of sucked. Like I'm not going to write about this restaurant. And then you can kind of just leave it out without necessarily slamming them. So like to bring yourself and be genuine about it, I think matters a lot.
All right, I want to ask you about one more story, and then we're going to wrap it up. You wrote about dry January recently, and one of the things that I found most interesting is you never know what advertisements are going to pop up on a website that you have nothing to do with as a reporter. But at least for me, when I pulled up the story, there was an advertisement for Belvedere vodka. I remember just thinking, how is it that Belvedere vodka's SEO ended up with putting an ad on this article about dry January? But anyways, that's kind of a side note. So you're right about dry January, but also the part that I found interesting is just the idea that who are the experts that you find in order to give credence to why this is important and what are some of the things that people should know about dry January. So how do you go about finding those experts that really are experts that can help the article?
Yeah, there's a few different ways I go about this. There's a platform called Help a Reporter Out, or HARO, and you can just put, if you're a journalist, you can just put kind of a call out about what you're working on and what type of experts you're looking for, and people can reach out to you. So like, let's say if it were the dry January story, I don't think I actually did this, but here's what I would do, would just be like, I'm working on a story about dry January, looking to talk about like how people can do it safely and like effectively, what maybe some of the benefits of going without alcohol for a month are. And so maybe I'd be looking to talk to like addiction counselors or social workers who see a lot of alcohol related substance abuse issues, or maybe, doctors who deal with it a lot or something like that. And then those people can get in touch with me kind of with their credentials. Maybe I can look through and then decide like, I want to ask you a few more questions and you a few more questions. So that's one way. And I found that to be very quick and effective and saves me a lot of time, which I appreciate. I think for this one, I wasn't using that platform yet. So I probably just like looked up, I think addiction counselors maybe was what I looked through, and social workers who had maybe written or published a blog post about like alcohol or dry January to sort of get their thoughts on it. So you can be research intensive, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
But I love that piece because I love talking to social workers and therapists. I think they're some of the most fun people to interview. So this was a fun one to write.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too, especially as someone who has done like dry January myself and talked to other people about, should we do it? And I think like the whole like buddy system, for a lot of us, it was like, okay, we're going to do this until the Super Bowl because I thought it's going to be the cutoff date of dry January or whatever.
Yeah, that was a fun one too, because I also do dry January. And I think I try to be really thoughtful about my relationship with alcohol. So I think that was also interesting in interviews where I could sort of say like, here's something that I think or have experienced. Like, what do you think about that? So sort of maybe that personal element made it a fun interview.
Yeah. And I think, and I keep trying to tell myself I should wrap this up, but I think just like your own personal experiences of this is something I'm thinking of, this is something that my friend groups are, because I do think that the story becomes more authentic as the writer when you can say, this is something that I've tried. And even if you say, this is what made it difficult, or this is the benefit that I got out of it, and this is what these other experts say, again, whether it's the shoes or whether it's dry January or whether it's, this vacation and, this helicopter ride was super interesting, and all those types of personalized ways of connecting with readers.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So let's wrap things up. Before we wrap things up, is there anything else that I've not asked you about just like the world of writing and freelancing that whoever's listening to this, students or people just out of college, should know about this world that you're in and, sort of like some of the challenges, but some of the excitement of it? Yeah.
I would say probably in college and, early post-grad, I definitely thought freelancing was something to supplement your like quote unquote real job. I think I wish I had known earlier that it could be a like fully like lucrative and enjoyable like career all on its own. I would say it's not without challenges, but I have enjoyed it so much. I've made more money doing this than I have at any staff job. And I don't think that's an unusual thing for freelancers. I think a lot of people discover that. And I will have taken like 5 weeks off by the end of the year, which is so much more vacation time than I was ever going to get at any job. So I think for someone maybe who values like travel or your free time, or just maybe doesn't want to work strict hours necessarily, I think it's a really enticing and enjoyable career path. And like I said, it can be challenging. It's not for everyone, and there's no like value judgment on that. But I would say, like, if you think you might want to do it, start saving up so you have a little safety net, and then like give it a try. If it doesn't work, just start applying for jobs again. Like take the leap if you can, if that's feasible for you.
Excellent. I like all of that advice. All right. One of the things that we like to do as we wrap up each edition of this podcast is to brag about other San Diego State alums who are making us proud. You're not allowed to use Jack or Alex because they were already on the podcast.
Yes.
But you can mention as many different people. Actually, you can mention them if you want. You can mention as many different people or one person, whoever you want to highlight about someone who went to San Diego State who is doing something that makes us proud.
Yeah, of course. Well, obviously Alex and Jack, making us all proud out there. But I want to call out two other people. They're fellow SDSU alums who live in New York City. And we've become, closer than we ever even were in college. Like, we've really developed real friendship. One of them is Will Fritz, who graduated, I should know this, I want to say 2019. I think it was 2019. But he is a political reporter covering LGBTQ issues for the American Independent. And he is like the most dogged reporter I've ever seen. I don't know how he has time to sleep. Like, he is just always working on something really cool. And the other one, who was not in JMS, but was in the communications department, is Adriana Millar. She works in healthcare PR she's an associate account director at Real Chemistry, and she's just doing amazing things in that space. She's totally climbing up the corporate ladder, doing really cool things over there.
All right. I just wrote their names down. That's two more potential candidates for this podcast in the future.
Yeah.
I like it. So the SDSU alum that I want to recognize this week, I try to do a little bit of a theme where it kind of relates to the guest. And so my person is Kevin Locke. Kevin Locke is a freelance photographer. He worked with me at the Daily Aztec. And Kevin is just one of these guys who, I don't know how he finds the people. I don't know how he finds the jobs, but next thing you know, he's taking pictures at the Lenny Kravitz concert and someone paid him to do it. And he knows that I like Lenny Kravitz. And so he takes a picture and he frames it and he sends it to me because he's a good friend. Or he's off in some other country and he's taking pictures of this. Or it can be sports, it can be politics, it can be music. You just never know. And then it's always really good to have a friend who is a photographer because he just understands the moment. So when we were at the Final Four, there was a group of 12 of us that were in about 2 or 3 different rows, and he was in the back. And before the final dramatic sequence, he just decides that he's going to film us. And so you see this unbelievable video of us all nervous. And then we get the stop and then we come down and we hit the shot and we all just go nuts. And to this day, it's my all-time favorite video. Anytime that I'm in a bad mood, I just watch it so that I can see us all celebrate hitting the game-winning shot. But Kevin's great. I mean, he's done weddings. He's done, again, politics, sports, news, you name it. I don't know where he finds the gigs, but every time that I talk to Kevin, he's always got something interesting that he's been doing, that he's been shooting. And he's proven that you can do it as a freelance photographer as well.
That's amazing. Good for him.
All right, Jamie, thank you so much for being generous with your time. I really enjoyed learning about all of the different things that you've done. I have so many notes myself about all the different avenues that reporters can utilize to find sources and for pitches. And I know that this is a really interesting podcast for a lot of different people. Thank you so much for your time.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me. If anyone listening wants to DM me on Twitter for advice, or as we've said, my email is on my website, so you can find it there. And I'm always happy to chat with fellow SDSU alums or current students.
Once again, that is Jamie Ballard. My name is Josh Suchon. I'm the host of the Where You At podcast. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person, or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.